Hi, everybody. This is Mike Messier. Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. A Messier World welcomes author Dauna D.M Needom. How are you today, Dauna?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. And just to clarify, DM is your author name.
Yes. Yes.
Is there any reason why you in particular chose to do that method, to have a pen name or an author name as opposed to using Dauna for your books?
The first book I wrote is written from a male's point of view. And initially I figured if I went by DM, they wouldn't know that a woman wrote it.
I like it. I like it. So then let the work, in a sense, kind of speak for itself, and not give the general audience another conversation of, oh, it's written from a woman, yet it's a man's point of view, right? Was that kind of what your thinking was?
Yes. Yes. And I've had men say that they can't believe that a woman wrote it. And, unfortunately, my initials DM is not really the best. I mean, I should have thought a little bit better about that because, now I'm a direct message. So, you know,
And the Better to Burn Out series. Um, Tell us, there's some rock and roll music in the thumbnail that I was using today for our interview. You've got a guitar, t- and I know that you have some experience as a DJ, if I'm correct.
mhm.
So you seem that's one of your passions is rock and roll music. Tell us about that.
I wouldn't say it's rock and roll so much as, pop, 80s, that type of music. Not hardcore pop. I mean, I do like rock. I like a lot of different music. There's certain genres that I don't, but we won't get into that. I was bass player in a band for a while. I was backup singer in a band. So I worked in that avenue. I also worked on movie sets as an extra and as also helping out the PAs. And I worked on a television show and I did some modeling for a TV thing. So all of these things kind of melded into, I have all these experiences. Why not use it to write a story? And I started writing fan fiction in high school, and it kind of all just morphed into what it is now. And I had experience from meeting bands and seeing the push of fans, and even being in a limo because my friend won a contest and we got to go to concert to and from in a limo, and we had fans follow us back to the hotel, and they got out and they had papers for us to sign and everything, and it was kind of amusing. But
Sure.
so I had that whole experience of what it's like to be that person, even though I wasn't.
Well, I mean, it makes me think of movies like Almost Famous, and just, I mean, the rock and roll lifestyle is what people think about. You know what I mean? And I know you said more like pop music, but I mean, it's music in general. There's something really interesting about that dynamic between performer and audience, and I believe in your books that is rock's star one of the subject matters, a central character. Tell me more about the books.
In the first one, which is My Days with the Dark Muse, which is written from a guy's point of view, you're basically reading his journal for the most part. Most of the book is his journal. He's a British rock star, he's a bass player, and he has a problem with cocaine. He likes to call it the goddess because it's another thing he likes to get down on his knees and worship. So we're taken through this really gnarly ride of his addiction, and we come out on the other side with, I can't really say because it'll give the ending away,
No
but
spoilers. No spoilers.
yeah. But I mean, it's a dark book. I mean, a lot of people say it's weird because some people say, "Oh, it's not that bad," and other people are like, "It's just so twisted, I can't handle it." So that's why I think a lot of people go, "I can't believe a woman wrote this," because it is from a guy's point of view, and it's not nice, and it's dark, and he does some seedy, nasty crap.
When you get that type of feedback from people who read your book, does that affect I always affect is with an A, which means a negative connotation, and E is with a positive connotation. But as a writer, does that type of critique, criticism, feedback, whatever you want to call it, does that influence you when you write further? Do you try to stop people from influencing your writing? What do you think about that?
For me, when I write, I usually go into that world. I usually go into that character's head. I see what's going on with them. I do have a friend that I actually bounce ideas off with now, and I've always had somebody, for the most part, to bounce ideas off. When I was writing My Days, I would ask my husband, "Does this sound right?" My husband loved the character; he thought it was great. The worst review I've ever gotten is a 3-star review. And the woman wrote, and I know why she wrote it, because she wanted a happily ever after. And there is no happily ever after in this book. She wrote that she hated the characters and she hated the book and she couldn't believe she finished it. And, my husband's like, "How are you about that?" And I'm like, "Here's the thing, I still connected with her. Hate is an emotion. And as a writer, if you can connect with someone emotionally, then you've done your job."
I believe that to me the tell is that she finished it.
Hmm.
If she, it's almost, this is my opinion, as a film person myself, creating my own films and writing stuff. I feel sometimes that if you really connected with people, sometimes they want to take authorship of the work, and so she is disagreeing with how the thing turned out, how the story turned out. It's almost like she's emotionally invested enough because she does like it, but she wants to hop in there and start co-writing with you, which in a way is effective because it shows that you've been effective as a writer. You've hooked her in. She's not arguing with your writing talents. She's kind of arguing with your choices of where the characters end up or what happens, because she likes it so much that she wants it to be different than what is written on the page.
Well, what's amusing about this is I ended up, as you know, with being in the film industry, you change things.
Right.
So I had some financial means, so I ended up getting a different cover. I hired a professional editor to go through the book, and I re-released it. And she bought another copy, and and then she took down that other 3-star review, and she gave me a new 3-star review, and I laughed to myself because I'm like, so you actually paid for it again, and you read it again, which
You're gonna.
but wait. So then she reads my other book, which is this one, Love is Worth
Okay.
Waiting For, which is still
Yeah.
set in the same world. And this character in the first book kind of makes an appearance in this book. And it's set 14 years apart, roughly. And this has a happily ever after. This is a romantic suspense. I wrote this because I entered a contest and then I decided not to enter the contest and keep my book. But she liked this book. She gave me 5 stars, said it was much different and much better. So it's like, I knew that the happily ever after was what really ticked her off, that there wasn't any resolution in that book.
To me, the psychology is that this lady has taken a vested interest in your career, Donna, and she's looking out for you.
I have no idea. I don't know who she is. And it's just one of those things where it's like, okay. And I mean, if I get it, the big thing about being a writer is when you get when you get feedback. If someone gives you 3 stars or 5 stars and there's no real commentary. I mean,
Right.
5 stars is kind of self-explanatory, but if there's a reason you didn't like it and you give me 3 stars, it'd be nice to know why, because maybe I can improve.
Yeah, and I just started this year putting books on Amazon, so I'm very encouraged by people like yourself. When was your first? When did you first start publishing your books? Was Amazon your first publishing, or did you do other books in other venues before Amazon, Donna?
Um, the first time I ever published was actually on an anthology, a vampire anthology. I had 2 short stories that I published in 2010 in this anthology, and I actually won an award for it. And then it took me, I didn't publish again until 2019. And the reason why I pushed to publish, because I had been working on a book that Nigel, the character in Daze, was in for like 30 years. And when my husband started dialysis, I started writing at Barnes and Noble. And my friend, because he had to do it 3 times a week, like almost 5 hours a day. So I would go there and I was his ride, I was his caregiver. So it had to be a certain point that I needed to figure out what I could do. So I started writing this character as a journal. And I started putting it online on a blog, and I have rehab centers following me and liking my posts. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if a rehab center actually thinks that this guy's real, then I'm doing my job as a writer.
Mm.
So I was right. I continued to write, and I started becoming friends with the people at Barnes, and our Barnes was actually going to close. And they had one more new authors night. And my friend who was in charge of that said, do you want to do it? And I'm like, okay. So I signed up. I went ahead and put Daze out on Amazon and at Barnes and everything else. And then I had a couple of print copies made so I could do the signing. And looking back, I mean, I have a bunch of copies of the original, and it's not good. I mean, it's not that there's a lot of problems with it. And you would think
Right.
since it was written in a journal form, it would be acceptable, but it's not.
Mm,
So that's why. I mean, when I first did it, I did it wide. And Love is Worth Waiting For, I did it wide. I went through draft through digital, and it did end up on Amazon. Now, right now, Love is Worth Waiting For is on Kindle Unlimited. Daze is not. So it's a matter of Amazon you have to be careful with because the Amazon has the potential, if you're doing paperbacks, to change your price without your knowledge.
interesting.
And then if you go to you ask them about it, they're like, well, you signed up to do it. And so then what gets really interesting about it is when you go to list it, promote it that it's on sale. This happened to me. They actually had the book at one point less than the ebook.
Mm,
And that's when I reached out to them. And so I promoted it, and I sold 2 copies of it, and then it went back up to the regular price. And it was like, okay, so how do you promote this when they drop this sale? Like right now, it's down to $7.59 for the paperback copy. And I'm like, okay, but that Amazon controls the marketplace in their world. So you have no real say.
for me, I found that jumping on because I was doing research on self-publishing, and a friend of mine here in Jacksonville, he had these stacks of his own books that he would go to the coffee shop with and sell them to people. And I guess he's more outroverted than me because I couldn't do that. I couldn't just have a stack of books and hey and start talking to strangers and sell a book to them. So I was looking into the publishing company he used. And then I did start doing some research, and I said, well, with Amazon, at least I don't have to pay an upfront fee of a couple of hundred or a couple of $1,000s. I can do this and get the book available without an investment up front. I think it's an exciting time for writers and filmmakers because with things like YouTube, there might be more stuff out there, so there's more competition. But I do feel that the opportunity for the platforms being more accessible to more people, to me, that's a very positive thing. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. And I mean, if you want to go wide as an author, a site like Draft to Digital can do it very simply for you because you can upload all your files and then it can send you to not only Amazon, but it can send you to Kobo, it can send you to Barnes and Noble, it can put you in the library system. So your book has a far reach. With a company like Ingram Spark, same thing. They can give you distribution without, Ingram, I think, is like 40 something dollars to do it.
Hmm.
So it's a minimal cost, but
Right.
they allow you where Amazon, the one thing about Amazon, and I will say this, when I did the book signing, I could not order my books from Amazon. I had to order my books from Barnes or another source because they refused to have books at a signing that say KDP, which I can understand. That's the competition. And you're selling it through their store. So there are certain parameters that if you're published through Amazon, limit you. Not so much
Right.
if you go to a regular signing, but if you got lucky enough to do like I did the New Writers Night, then you have to look at what can I do. But yes, it's an exciting time. And also with the television industry, if you look at the television industry now, you have Netflix, you have all these other little sources. Even there's a network just basically for romance shows now. That's a downloadable app. So Passionflix is what it's called. So there's all sorts of different avenues, and that also gives you as a writer the ability to have somebody pick up your book and
Right.
like it and then make it into something.
Well, I mean, I was here in Jacksonville, Florida, watching my TV. I guess it's a smart TV, and they have these kind of built-in free channels. And one of them, I just turned the TV on, and it's a new TV. I'm playing around with it. I've got these free channels, and I see a movie on something called Maverick Channel. And the movie, I'm in it. I'm in the movie that was filmed like 10 years ago. My buddy Crosby Tatum made a really a low budget movie out of his own pocket. He starred in it, he produced it, he wrote it, and here we are about 10 years later, and it's on Maverick Channel. Surprise, surprise is the name of the movie. And this is a movie that I saw this guy make this thing. I was there for his pre-production meetings. It seems less than 10 years ago, but he was talking about his idea for a movie.
Hmm.
10 years later, I'm in a state, I've moved, and here is the movie on TV, and I'm watching it in the comfort of my own home, as I say. And it's an African American based network called Maverick Channel. And I thought that was great, because when I first started making movies, those opportunities were not really there. So things accelerate quick, don't they?
Oh yeah, I mean, when I did the television production back in 1998, we still had limited access to what we who we could sell it to. We went down to the National Television Producers and Executives Convention, and we tried to sell it there. And it was an incredible time. You got to be around a lot of different people, and you were trying to sell your ideas. But now, I mean, it's blossomed even more than that because at that point you were only selling it to cable. You weren't selling it to streaming services. And now, anybody can have a streaming channel. It's just a
Right.
matter. I mean, like right now what we're doing, we're streaming.
Yeah.
So
The other thing is that we're also just playing around, and I thank you for being part of this because I'm streaming this to Facebook and to LinkedIn and to YouTube, and so there might be some people popping in and popping out or catching the replay, and it's all very new to me. So I thank you, Donna, for being part of the
no
really the
problem.
first day of taping. Now I wanted to talk about kind of personal stuff. It's not as upbeat as we've been saying, but I think it's important. And I'm just going to kind of give the general parameters of the situation I'm talking about, and you can take it as far or as not so far as you feel comfortable with today. Um, I was very impressed with the Better to podcast. I was a guest on your podcast. So just to clarify, everybody, Donna's got the Better to Burn Out book
It's
series.
right. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Better to Burn Out book series. And I always think when I hear I've got something to say, it's better to burn out than to fade away. I think of that coming from the Kurgan from the movie Highlander, 1986. However, I was informed later on that it was also a quote from Neil Young. Is that one of those two ways that you came up with that? Like, is that how it got into your system, the better to burn out, or something else?
It's always been the Highlander, and yes, I know about Neil Young, but it's actually Def Leppard.
Okay,
Def Leppard.
Hysteria.
Yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
it the
It's better to
Hysteria
burn
song?
out. Um,
I got something to say. It's better to burn
yes,
out
burn
than
out then fade away. Yep. Yeah.
I thought it was Neil Young too, but you're right. It is Def Leppard. But I
No, but
could
it
have
is. I
sworn.
mean, Neil Young, I do believe has said it. He's the one that
Right.
originated it. And see, you have to be careful with copyright infringement and better to burn out. That is a statement though that is so part of our dialogue now. It's not necessarily a song lyric. I mean, it's part of our fabric,
Right.
especially after Highlander and Def Leppard. It has become just part of who we are. Because how many times were you partying as a younger person, going, "Yeah, it's better to burn out than fade away." I
Right.
mean,
Right. But then on top of that, the podcast is titled simply "Better to ellipses 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 Better to." So it's not the podcast. If people are looking for the podcast, where can they find that, Donna?
it's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on most podcast providers. And the whole reason that came about was because a long time ago, when my husband and I first got together, he tried chasing me away. He says, "I'm sick. I'm not going to be here forever." And I said, "You know what? It's better to love you than lose you." And last December, somebody asked me to be a guest on their podcast, and it was all about fear, talking about fear for 365 days. And my fear was losing my husband, and I had already lost him at that point. So after talking to him, I realized, it's like that when I started researching the better two, everybody's got a better two moment. And I mean, they can be very serious or they can be very trite. Like somebody I think had posted, it's better to have a dollar than 100 pennies. I mean, there's still silly stuff for better too when you research it. But then without thinking about it, after I had already started doing the podcast, I'm like, you've branded yourself without even
Right.
really trying. So, and the podcast itself is actually kind of interesting because so many people have so many different stories, and it's been a journey. I mean, I've talked to some wonderful people all over the world, and some of their stories have been shocking, and some of them have been kind of lighthearted and amusing. I mean, my next guest coming up is a male model, and we had some fun talking about that. But he wanted to change the perception. Hold on, my cat.
What's the cat's name?
That's Chloe. And normally I wouldn't grab her like that, but she was aiming right for the keys.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. We both had some technical issues today, so I appreciate you defending him from Chloe.
no problem. But he was talking about the fact that what people expect of a model. You get this guy working all the time that he can't have a life, and he's always in shape, and he's like, no, that's not the case. But I mean, we talked more than that. I mean, he graduated from college recently, and he was on the dean's list for five times. That's not an easy feat.
No, it's not.
So,
I was
I
listening
mean,
to your. Go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was listening to your show. You had a gentleman who was kind of doing the 9 to 5 job type of thing, and then he kind of rediscovered his love of creativity because he had people telling him that he should be a stand-up comedian. And like yourself, he had some experience with disc jockey work. And you guys were talking about the backgrounds of like the radio stations being influenced by the sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati. So I related to all those stories. And what I kind of like about your podcast is it's got like kind of a defining question for each guest before they even go into the show, which is, what is a moment in your life that you did something pretty pivotal, and now years later or even decades later, you look back and say, man, was it better to have done that, or should I have not done that? And the origin story, so to speak, is kind of like the pretty heavy stuff here. So just to broach both yourself and the audience that this will be a bit of a heavy topic, but I think it's very important. That's why I don't want to shy away from it. Um, your mom had some tough situations, and it seemed like for you growing up was hard because your mom had some mental health issues that you were dealing with, and that put you in a tough spot. And I'm just kind of curious if and how. I'm pretty positive it did. How did the tough experiences with your mom and dealing with her situations and trying to help her, how did that influence your writing? Because I feel like if there's one thing that can come from tough life experiences with family members, you can always manifest that into creativity. And I've got to think, Donna, that your tough experiences as a kid, a 17-year-old girl, watching your mom go through these situations, doing your very best to help, that had to come through for you in your life as a writer. Am I on the right path here?
You are. Her journey with her mental health issues were a long time, and I want to say this: the reason that first episode, Saving Mom, is up there, and I do go raw, I guess, about it, is because I figured if I was going to do a podcast and I was going to ask people tough questions, the first person that needed to answer a question was me,
Right.
because it's not something easy. And, suicide. My mother, she was undiagnosed bipolar. That's the best psych I had. That's what my therapist says now. She was undiagnosed bipolar. I'm sure there was a couple of other things. Um, you, the best way to the best way to say this is, at 9 years old, before 9 years old, I had very idyllic childhood.
Right.
I had a dad who was a fireman. My dad worked on cars. And we're not talking just regular cars. My dad would work on Rolls Royces, Ferraris, Lamborghinis. I had the luxury of riding in all these. I had, I mean, dare I say, I was spoiled. I had a playroom. I mean, we were living in a duplex, but I had these trappings of, this is what life is. And my parents split, and I saw their last fight. And the thing is, I didn't know all of these things until after. When my parents split, the first time now looking back that I remember was when I was around 9 or 10. My dad took me to Mardi Gras because we lived in New Orleans, and he brought me back home. We had spent the day with his girlfriend, and we were looking for my mom, and she wasn't around. I didn't know where she was. So my dad went and checked in the bathroom, and then he sent me outside. And my grandma came and got me. And next thing I know, she's in the hospital. And I know I'm
Mm,
smiling right now, but sometimes when I smile, it's to mask, to keep my emotions under control, I guess.
sure.
But, you know, when she finally got out, my mother and my grandmother, I'm sitting in a car at 10 years old, and my mother is trying to take me away from my grandmother. My mom has custody, they're not divorced. And my grandmother's calling my mom a whore.
Mm,
Now, this is my father's mother.
right.
Now, mind you, none of you guys are sitting here going, why is she saying this? But this is important because this starts this whole chain of my dad saying my mom's not a good mother, blah, blah, blah. My mom at some point sent me to live with other people. My mom tried to beat the shit out of me one time because I deliberately failed a test.
Right.
And this all boils up to when you get in high school and you've moved to a different place and you suddenly have a stepfather and you have siblings, and this person has idolized, meaning my mother has idolized this man who is still in love with his first wife.
Her second husband,
Yeah.
and he's still in love with his first wife.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, when you come home from school bawling and you tell your mom, hey, I need to talk. And she's like, no, I don't have time for you. You this is where I'm tying it into what you want or
Right.
asked. The fact of the matter is that's when I started writing fan fiction, because besides journaling, that was my only escape. It was an escape for me. You know, I could have turned to drugs, I could have turned to booze, but I chose to escape into words, into stories, and have this fantasy life of having what I wanted in my life. And, you know, it kept me on the straight and narrow. And it gave me a platform for being a storyteller. I mean, I had always, since the moment they divorced, I would take art and create art. If it was a sheet of loose leaf paper, I'd make a little apartment building and create little stories in my head. I'd insert myself into TV shows, Battlestar Galactica. I was Boxy's sister, you
Right.
know, anything to give me a point to be happy and away from that. So,
Escapism.
mhm.
The escapism that you were, if I could just suggest, you found the Buck Rogers and the things that you were enjoying, this creative world as escapism from the pain that surrounded you. And then at some point you became the creator of worlds, the
Mhm.
creator of your own stories, the written word, the podcast, being in a rock and roll or a pop music band. You said as a bassist. So I can relate to that. You know what I mean? I can totally relate to that. I can totally relate to that story. If people want to hear the whole story, they can go to the Better Two podcast and listen to episode one. Very detailed, and I think more people than you think, Donna, or maybe not you, but a lot of people couldn't relate to that story. Let's put it that way. And it's hard hitting because you really have to hit this point as a 17-year-old girl. Was it better to have saved my mom's life at that point or not? And you come to the conclusion that it was. But these are hard hitting questions that a 17-year-old kid has to ask herself. That, to me, it's a testimony to you as a survivor of that situation. And how did you make that work best for you? And I think you've done that. So congratulations on that.
Thanks, but I mean, it's not been an easy journey. And that being said, I mean, she, you know, I saved her at 17, and our relationship didn't get any better, and she ended up finally completing that mission. I mean, I talk about that couple that's talked, you know, lost their daughter, and they said she had always been on a mission to complete suicide. And that's what my mom did. She was on a mission. And there was a long time afterwards that you know, suicide is one of those things where you don't know. It's the biggest form of rejection you can ever get.
Mm,
And it takes a long time for you to really rationalize that it's not your fault. You couldn't have done anything to change it. I mean, there's still times, you know, sometimes things will pop in your head and you're like, well, could I have changed something? And you can't. It's just you have to learn how to deal with it and navigate. You know, when I hit 41, I was like, well, I outlived my mother.
right.
And I've lived most of my life without her. The thing is, though, there's always that shadow because, you know, even, and these are the things that people don't think about. When you go to a doctor's office and they're like, parents' health history, and you write deceased, and then they're like, well, what happened to your mother? All
Yeah.
right, so here you go. I mean, you have that stigma on you for the rest of your life, whether you want to or not. It's always there. It's always there.
I'm actually being educated in a online. It's a phone conference class that a friend of mine signed me up for, kind of sponsored me to take, and it's to help people recognize the signs of suicide with other people, or maybe even themselves, and to be a listening ear or an advocate to try to stop this thing. And the numbers for suicide are so high. It was amazing to me how high the numbers are, the statistics. I don't have to go into the exact statistics, but just it's more prevalent than we think. And it's sad. And I think one thing that guess I would just think is that as the child of someone who did commit suicide, it's like you said, you have that feeling of what could I have done. But to me, it's so sad because it's really about the parent. In an ideal situation, the parent is the one that's helping the kid, and
Right.
you're put into a situation, you and others and many people are put into this situation where, as the kid, you're trying to figure out, how do I fix mom or dad, or how do I fix mom and dad's relationship, or how do I get mom to calm down, or how do I get dad to not be angry. And that's not in the natural order of things. Ideally, the parent is the guiding influence, but in these situations, in many people's situations, the kid is trying to play referee for the parent and how they deal with the world.
I have a perfect story to that. At 9 years old, we used to go to Disney every year. We would drive to Disney. My dad, since they opened it, and they opened in 1971, they loved to go to Disney. We always would go to Disney. So actually, I was 8. And we were supposed to go to Disney. And I remember looking at both my parents and saying, I'm not going. And they're like, why? Now, what kid, let me ask you this, what kid in their right mind says, I'm not going to Disney?
Right.
I said, I'm not going. They're like, why don't you want to go? I'm like, because you guys need to spend some time alone.
Hmm.
Now, mind you, I don't remember them fighting, not until the last fight. But yet intuitively and instinctively, I said to them, you need to go by yourself. And the thing is, when we talk, to be fair to my mother, I not only had to be the parent for her, at times I had to be the parent for my dad because my dad was an alcoholic.
Right.
And then when we moved in with my grandparents, my grandfather was an alcoholic.
Right.
So, I mean, I got to go into bars at like 9 and 10 years old. This is not something that a 9 and 10-year-old girl does. But in New Orleans, it was acceptable back then. I didn't drink, but I could have. I watched my half sister, get beer from her mom.
Right.
At 2 years, at 2. So, I mean, while my story may seem outlandish, I think nowadays, especially nowadays, we're being more honest about the fact that a lot of us were forced to be parents to our parents.
Right.
And the suicide numbers are going up because of the fact that we are in this pandemic. And I'm not going to go in the pandemic talk, but we have lost that human connection that we used to have. You used to be able to walk up to somebody and hug them. You used to walk up and be able to shake their hand. There was a physical connection, and now we don't have that as much. And without that lack of contact, the numbers are going to go up because, especially with the younger people, the things we took for granted, such as, oh, well, it's senior year. Not that I wanted to go to my prom, but I did. We had prom, we had graduation, we had all these things to go to. But now, what do you have to look forward to?
Right. The kids that graduated, I guess, in 2020 had a whole big thing with, Oprah and the Obamas. And it was a thing on YouTube where it's like, hey, kids, here's your special online graduation party. But it's not the same. It's not the same as having the ceremony. And I agree. I feel bad for the kids of today who've lived through this situation. And one of the statistics from this suicide prevention course I'm in was that the opening question is, what state in the USA do you think has the highest suicide rate? Was the question. I don't know if you want to take a guess, Donna, just for fun. Not that it's a fun question, but
I almost want to say Florida, but I don't think that's it.
no. The answer was actually Montana, and the reason is they figured is because not the amount of people, but the percentage.
Okay.
The percentage is so high in Montana because it's an isolation state. It's probably a beautiful state, and it caught me by surprise too. Because you think about Montana, you think of horses and landscapes, but the point is there's just not a whole lot of people there. So the people that are there, those that would be lent to depression, they don't have as many places to go. There's not a coffee house. There's not a restaurant. There's not a bar. There's not a movie theater, perhaps. So the isolation is the factor. That was the whole point of that statistic. So it's interesting that we are social animals. So the downside, and I won't get on a soapbox either, but one of the many downsides of this pandemic is is the interaction. When you're saying social distancing, uh, yeah, because we don't want to get this damn disease, but at the same time, that causes another set of problems, which is the human psyche. So there you go. And
Well, for me, I mean, I went through, and I'm not the only one. A lot of us lost people during the pandemic. I lost my husband. I mean, I was with my husband 24/7 for the most part. And to not have him after a year and a half, it's kind of, I realized yesterday or a couple of days ago, more so than ever, it hit home that it's like, that's one thing I miss. I miss being able to stand there, him hold me. And that may seem crazy, but you don't realize it until after that,
it's
as time
tough.
passes.
Yeah, and there are certain losses that could never be replaced, I guess, or certain voids that can't be filled. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And as humans, I think we often look for the band-aid for somebody. Hey, this happened, let me give you this, or let me introduce you to this person. But some things, it's just like, you know what, this person is irreplaceable, this relationship is irreplaceable, I'm going to move on and adjust, but please don't try to replace anybody because it can't be done.
I got a podcast coming up. I think it's 2 or 3 episodes from now, where I talked to a lady who lost not one husband but two husbands, and they were similar situations as to what I lost. And we talk about grief. We have a whole conversation about grief and the expectations of grief and things of that nature. So it's an important conversation, I think, that many people need to hear, because we look at grief and people are always there right after somebody dies. But as time goes on, people walk away and you're still left grieving. I mean, because grieving is not a linear process. You can be happy one day and then suddenly angry.
Right. Yeah, something could happen where it triggers you, like you go to a certain restaurant, or you drive by someplace, and some memory triggers a flood of emotions, and you can't even help that. I lost several people close to me in a very short period of time, which was unusual for me because I had like a good 12-year run, Donna, where nobody very close to me passed away. And I remember being in that time period saying, man, I must be lucky because nobody I know has died recently. And then, of course, that streak ended. And when it ended hard. And suddenly it's a best friend, it's a family member, and suddenly that streak of not losing people ended. And when it ended, it ended quickly, and it ended ferociously. So I encourage people to check out your podcast. Because sometimes you just say things like on all the major podcast apps. But where, if you were to guide people to find your show, maybe someone that's never even listened to a podcast before, not very often, how would you guide them to find the Better Two podcast, Donna?
If you went to my website, dmneedom.com, there's a link there that would take you to wherever. Spotify is available. Anchor has all the links available, but I mainly tell people to go to Apple. It's easy, it's simple. Spotify is simple. So those two are the main ones, but I mean, there are other outlets. I haven't even ventured into those other outlets, but I know they're there because I go through Anchor.
Right. So just to clarify, folks, because it's Better Two and then dot
Dot,
dot
dot,
dot
dot.
is the
Mhm.
Better Two podcast. And how many episodes have you? You got like at least 30 or 40 episodes,
No,
right?
I only got 26. I've only been doing this since March 24th.
Oh wow. Well,
So,
you have a high production rate. You must be doing one or two a week, right? At
yeah,
least.
yeah.
That's great. And Donna, how many books do you have now that are available for the public?
Currently, I have two books. I have My Days with the Dark Muse
Yeah.
and Love is Worth Waiting For. And I'm due to have another book come out in this series, not Nigel's book. Another book that'll be a standalone involving two characters from Worth Waiting For, but set with Nigel. Nigel is in the book, and it's set in the 80s. And that book is Remember Who's Your Man. And then hopefully by early next year, the second book in Nigel. So Nigel's running the series. Everything else is kind of a standalone book. His book will be out in, I'm hoping, February, March of next year, and that will tell his version of the story, his story that is told from Ava and Russell's point of view in Who's Your Man.
That's awesome. I want to say a quick thank you. I believe it's Todd Hamilton, TW Hamilton. I think that's my friend Todd, who's been watching us and enjoying the podcast. So thank you.
Nice.
And anyone who's watching this episode, you can share the link. You can put it on your Twitter, your social media. Share the conversation with Dauna here on Messier World. I had to come up with a new name for this podcast because I'm trying this new StreamYard app, Dauna. And I said, man, I've invested in this thing. I'm committed to upgrading my quality of podcasts, and I think it's going to work out. Having a little technical stuff today, but maybe it's just because it's the weekend. Who knows?
It happens. It happens. So what are your future plans for your podcast?
Well, before we talked to you today, I interviewed Tom Kane, who's a film industry pro. He worked on the movie Kramer versus Kramer. And we might have to retype the whole thing, to be honest with you, because Tom, he's worked on like some big budget movies, right? So this whole podcast thing, Tom's like, "What's this?" And we might retape, to be honest with you, because I feel like knowing Tom, he wants the best quality, like you know what I mean. And we were having
Yeah,
issues
yeah.
with the,
Honestly,
yeah. Go
my
ahead.
my first guest, I ended up having to record it twice
Yeah,
because we had sound issues. So it's par for the course. It happens.
it's a learning process, and that's the thing. Like you can't. There's an old expression: you can't rush greatness. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you start off and you build. And I appreciate you being here and the audience being here with us. And I did want to mention that you're in Chicago. We didn't get around to saying that, but you are in Chicago. It's a
I
city. Go ahead.
I'm actually 80 miles outside of Chicago. I'm about 8 miles from Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, Chicago is, I label Chicago as my home because otherwise you're going to be like, where?
Right.
So,
Well, you can give a shout out to your hometown if you want. It's up to you.
well, I'm from New Orleans originally. So, but Chicago's been my home for 27 years, almost 28.
Was there a reason for you to move to where you are now as opposed to staying in New Orleans? Was there many reasons or
I originally was from New Orleans. We moved to Shreveport. Then I left Shreveport to pursue a band with a friend, and we moved to Dallas. And then from Dallas, my first husband, and I moved up to Indiana. And I met a friend. And when I left my husband, I moved to Chicago. And then my dad says, "Hey, come back. You got a free ride to college." And I'm like, "Okay." I was 27, and I went back, and I couldn't deal with his drinking, and I couldn't deal with my grandmother being very clingy, which I understand now, but at the time, and so I came back up here. I had an opportunity and I took it, and I've been up here since.
that's great.
So,
And it's just to me you've heard the term butterfly effect, I'm sure, right?
mhm.
And what I kind of dig about your show, your podcast I'm talking about is it's like let's take a step back and let's examine a point in our history where we made a big decision and then we said, was the butterfly effect that I took making that decision that changed all these possible variables and outcomes, was that for the better, or should I have done the other alternate route? I do have one final question for you, which you can take as much time as you want with. But with all the guests on your 26 episodes of the Better To podcast, is there anyone that said, I shouldn't have done what I did? I should have done the other thing. You know what I mean? Because it seemed like for me, I answered the question, yes, I'm glad I did what I did. I'm glad I moved to Florida and to the sunnier weather and took that chance. That was my answer for your show. But did you ever have a guest that answered it the opposite way and say, you know what? I think I made the wrong choice.
I don't think so. But I mean, here's the thing. This is what you really have to step back and look at when you're talking about choices. I'm trying to remember, but I don't think any guest has ever said they didn't make the right choice. But even the wrong choice is the right choice because ultimately, one of my friends says a statement, and a lot of people have, that whatever's meant for you will be there. And I wholeheartedly believe that because I was told I was going to meet my second husband many a times. And I'm like, yeah,
Hmm.
right. I took a class and my teacher's like, you need to meet this person. I'm like, okay, fine. So I met this person, and this person ended up being my second husband's ex-girlfriend. And she ended up becoming my roommate. And I ended up meeting my second husband, and we had great life. But when we started unpacking things, he worked down the street from me. There was a lot of things in common for us. So what I'm getting at is sometimes even the wrong choice is the right choice because ultimately we still ended up together. Shorter amount of time, but we still ended up together. So if you look back, even if you get into a bad relationship, okay, even so let's say that. If you meet somebody and it's the worst relationship in the world, did you learn something from it? Did you figure out who you were? Did you see who you were? Did you get a lesson from it? And I mean, I think that's kind of the thing you have to look at, even in the your worst mistakes. And I mean, I've made my mistakes. I'm not going to say I haven't. I'm not perfect. No way near shape, form, anything. But the fact of the matter is, even at our worst moments, the things where we sit there and go, oh my gosh, what have I done? When you step back 5, 10 years from now, you can go, okay, maybe it wasn't that bad. And that's the one thing I have to say about suicide. I would sit there and tell my mom, you don't know what tomorrow holds. And that's the thing. We have to look at life in a bigger picture. We get so focused on that one point, that one moment in time, that this is how life goes on. This is how we handle things. And we're in that moment, but we're not looking at the big picture. We don't know that somebody's not going to come into our life tomorrow. If you're feeling lonely and you feel like you're never going to meet somebody, we don't know that. We don't know that we're not going to win the lottery tomorrow, or we're going to get a different job. We don't know these things. And so I think if you look at the bigger picture, you'll see that even if you make that mistake and you go through suffering, you've learned something.
You've strengthened yourself, and
Hmm.
or the environment has strengthened you. As long as you don't give up, you're still in the fight.
And
Um,
that excuse me, I'm sorry.
Go
And the
ahead.
one thing I want to say, this is why I do the podcast, is because maybe somebody else's story resonates with somebody. And I've had people reach out to me to be on the show, and they said, I was listening to your podcast, and the story about the Navy vet who is battling alcohol. I realized that you give people a safe space to be able to talk about it. And I want to do that. And I look at it and I'm like, okay. I mean, because to me, I'm helping somebody else. And that is a feeling that gives you purpose, and that you realize you're making a difference in somebody else's life.
Well, like I said, listening to episode one, talking about, I believe it's titled "Saving Mom." I could really relate to a lot of the stuff going on in that story, and I felt like this is an important topic. And just because I think more kids than we realize, especially, are going through traumatic situations at home, and they go to school, and maybe they put on a brave front. They put on their blue jeans and their t-shirt and their backpack, and they take their classes at school, whether it's public high school or elementary school. But you don't know what's going on when that kid goes home. There could be some crazy stuff going on, and it's not the kid's fault. And it's very rarely the kid's fault, to be honest with you. It's almost never the kid's fault. So I just felt really intrigued by your story, and just happy for you that you've done so well as a writer. And even you're talking about your second husband. I don't want to shortchange that either, because you said in another episode, or maybe the same episode, that he was trying to shy you away from him a bit as a romantic
Hmm.
partner, because he said to you, "Hey, Donna, I've got this health issue, and I don't know how much time I have. Let's not get too attached, because I don't want to leave you early in the game of a relationship." But I guess you didn't want to hear that. You were like, "Hey, this is what I want." You guys had a great 16-year relationship, and I'm sure, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing that you prolonged his life in a positive way, because of the companionship and the love that you guys had for each other. Am I right?
I heard from his parents and his family many a times that John wouldn't have been, and he would have even said it, that he would not have been here as long as he was. He would say, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. And that being said, and I have to also go back to something that you were saying a minute ago. That being said, do I regret my choice of loving him? No, because he was a great love, and I was lucky enough to have that. Most people don't get that love. But the one thing I will say is, it's not only kids in school that we all put on this front. We sit here in front of a camera, we welcome you into our home, and you see us smiling, you see us happy. But do you really know what's going on with somebody behind that camera? Do you
Right.
really know what someone else is saying? I wrote something when I was in college, and it was about people wearing masks. And I think we're all very good at putting a mask on because we have certain ways we're supposed to act, and certain ways we're supposed to be seen. And that's a lot of pressure. And I think, you can take it up to Hollywood and celebrities, how we're putting out into the world what we're supposed to look like.
everybody's supposed to be good little boys and girls, right? And then it
Hmm.
seems like a select few. Howard Stern in the '90s could say whatever he want, and people just shrugged it off. Well, he's Howard Stern. But I mean, we take a look at our world today, and to me, there's so many nuances of what's okay for celebrities but not okay for the regular person, or what's okay for the regular person but not okay for the celebrity. I could sit here with the camera off and say something glib and informal and tell some politically incorrect joke, and nobody would second guess it. Oh, it's just Mike being funny, or you know but if you put that same thing in a tweet from a celebrity with 5 million followers, then you've got World War III breaking out.
Well, here's a prime example. Okay, so this, back to this for a second. Love Was Worth Waiting For is a second chance romance. And I belong to a bunch of book groups because, I'm an author. And a lady posted something about Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez. And people started lashing out. And she's like, well, wait a second. But you guys all love second chance romances. What's the problem? Well, he cheated,
Mm.
which is another big double standard in the romance land. Is in a book, a woman can cheat, but a guy cheats? Oh no. So I mean, it's goes back to what you're saying. There's certain little parameters.
Right, right, right.
So
Certain things, and I won't get political, but let's just say our last, couple of presidents or so, what we expect from our world leaders terms of behavior, in terms of combativeness, in terms of insults back and forth, suddenly that game has changed quite a bit too. And I think it would be tough. I don't have any kids, but I think it would be tough to have kids these days. So I give my friends that have children, or even strangers that have children, I give them all the credit in the world for trying to raise kids in this environment where the rules seem to be changing every 5 minutes. You're trying to instill good behaviors and good ethics into your kids, but yet the people that they see in these trusted positions in the world stage seems to be askew, seems to be off. So I feel for the kids of today and their parents
well,
trying to live.
you can take it down a little bit further than just watching politics because even though when we're talking about childhood, yeah, my childhood wasn't perfect necessarily, but I still at times got to be a kid. I still got to go outside and play. I didn't have to, yeah, Atari came out, I guess, when I was in junior high. So video games other than Pong, which Pong only lasted so long,
Right,
before you got bored with it. You weren't glued to the TV. You weren't glued. You were outside. You were experiencing life. You didn't have a phone to be tethered to. If you wanted to look something up, you had a book to look it up in. And I love technology. I do. But, if you were bored, you were bored. You
right.
weren't, your parent wasn't going to say, oh, here's my phone, play. So, I mean, I think it's a different world for kids now because they're always being giving information, always, constantly. It's always coming at them. And even in high school, if you got picked on, you could go home and avoid it. Now you log into social media and somebody's still going at you.
Right. And you're right. And cyberbullying, to be honest, I didn't realize naively that it was a thing until I started hearing some real life situations of kids going to elementary school and high school, and I'm thinking, hey, didn't the Ricky Schroeder, one to grow on, teach us anything? Like I'm thinking in my naive mind, didn't we handle bullying? Wasn't there an after school special, or wasn't there a movie? Wasn't these situations but they're not being handled is the point, or they're getting worse.
Well,
This,
the representation of how kids act too has changed over the years too. I mean, when we were growing up, you said yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. If you said anything out of line, you were in trouble. And I think kids should have a right to speak up, but a lot of kids are portrayed on certain channels, which I will not mention names, as to be very much, what we would have been called sassy.
right,
And they talk back. And if we would have talked back, while you should, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a voice because you should be seen and you should be heard. I just think it should be maybe done a little differently.
right.
and maybe we wouldn't have this empowered of the keyboard jockey who has no followers or has no content on there, but they're attacking everybody, the content providers, because they're comfortable doing it, because they can't get attacked because they have nothing.
Yeah, well, social media is such a it levels the playing field quite a bit, and it's another thing where, hey, look, I liked social media, but at the same time, 5 years ago, I wrote an article called "Living for Likes," and basically what I did is I compiled other sources from the New York Times and so forth, and I did some real research into Facebook in particular. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of crazy things going on here with privacy issues and all types of stuff and influence. But yet, and I closed my Facebook account down for about 6 months until I started another one. You know what I mean? Because I
Yeah.
couldn't be left out. Because the catch 22 for me is someone who's trying to get ahead as a writer myself and as a content provider. I need, at least in my own mind, I need these sources of connecting: LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. I want to connect with people, but at the same time, I know the dangers of the connection. I do want to say a special thanks to Adam. He's a big subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube follower. He's watching us live, I think, on YouTube.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, Adam. And he says, Messier's Mantra Part 2, good interview.
Thanks.
And yeah, I appreciate that. And what he's referencing is I used to have this show, about 150 episodes, Donna, called Messier Mantra up in Seekonk, Massachusetts, before I moved here. And the show just won a Best Web Series award from Havelock International Film Festival.
Nice.
That show is kind of keeping that show was like this new one that you're on today is in the tradition of a Messier Mantra, where it's a long form interview show. I try to get to know people and try to find out what makes them tick and share some life lessons, as you've done. And you have many life lessons to share. I think you're really an extraordinary person, and I think it's great that your creativity is coming through in so many different ways, and you're using your conversational skills with the podcast to get other people to share their stories too.
I've been very, very blessed to be able to have that platform and to be able to expand on it and to talk to those other people, because going back to losing my husband, it's kind of been a life saving grace, because I do get that contact with other people, and I do get to hear interesting stories that take me out of maybe my grief. Besides writing, I actually have the sociable contact of, hearing a story. There are days when I listen to somebody's story and I want to tear up, and I'll go back to the male model for a second. We're talking and I said, so what's it like to see you on the cover of a book? Cause he mentioned that he started reading one of them. And I'm like, are you able to separate the fact that you're on the cover and the character is you? And he's like, no. And it's like, I was quite surprised, what's in there. And it wasn't my book, but it made me laugh. And sometimes, in our grief or our sadness, we need that laughter. And so podcasting is a relief for that. It's something to benefit a lot of different people. Thanks, Adam. He said nice.
He's a good guy. He's very active on this comments, and he's very active, and I appreciate that, Adam. Thanks, buddy.
So,
and go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say. So I mean, I just think that I appreciate that you wanted me to talk to you, and yeah, I've had a crazy life, and I've done things I never thought I would do, and I can sit here and say, something that would shock most people is I modeled lingerie at one point in my life. And most people look at me and go, yeah, right. I did. It was for a home shopping channel in Shreveport, but I did it, and it was awkward, but I did it. And I mean, when you look at your life, if you can look back, maybe I didn't finish college, but I had this grand adventure. And I know there's a lot of people. My husband used to tell me, you need to write all your stories down. And I haven't. I used some of them in my books. Because I hung out with rock stars and I got to work on movie sets, and Julia Roberts ran right past me in my best friend's wedding. It's exciting, but it's my life, and I don't really look at it. And even the trauma I've had, some of my friends were like, "Wow, I can't understand how you survived that trauma." And it's like, it was my life. When you're living through trauma, you survive.
Right. No, I can relate to that, and You mentioned that you had done some extra work on films. Was it My Best Friend's Wedding? Was And what are some of the other films that you worked
Uh,
on?
the Negotiator, and then I was a featured extra, which really doesn't amount to anything, in a TV movie called Since You've Been Gone. David Schwimmer was the director, but it was cool because we got to do makeup and wardrobe and stuff, and it was like a 2 o'clock in the morning shoot in the city of Chicago because it was a night shoot. And I remember working my normal job and then going to be an extra and then going to the company parking lot and locking myself in the gated parking lot so I could get a couple hours of sleep before work the next day. But
I eh, I've done plenty of extra work. I'm in the one of my most interesting film experiences was I was hired to do extra work, and I ended up in a scene with Meryl Streep and Elizabeth Shue in Hope Springs. So there was
nice.
always this debate. Yeah, there's always this debate going on in New England of should you be doing extra work, amongst the local actors, because the question is if you typecast yourself as an extra or if the casting directors think of you as quote just an extra. I'm putting the quote things up. Just an extra, you'll never be called in for a featured role. Well, I went back and forth on that debate, but when Meryl Streep comes to town, I got to be there regardless. I'll be an extra for Meryl Streep. No problem with that. But on this particular day, I went to do extra work and I ended up in a scene with Meryl Streep. And, you know, before that day, and it was really thanks to Elizabeth Shue ad libbing. I was kind of, I wouldn't say down on extra work, but I was just a little bit, I just kind of said, well, it's a paycheck. It's a couple of $100 for the day. You go in, nobody gets hurt. It's relatively easy money. You talk to some of your friends in catering and holding and stuff. But after that experience, I did have to reevaluate, because I'm like, man, I've kind of been not so excited about doing extra work, but in this really rare situation, I'm benefiting from doing extra work tremendously. I just was in a scene with Meryl Streep where they're using my name, Mike, in the scene with Elizabeth Shue. So the lesson that I got from that one was that age old cliche, half of life is showing up, and if I didn't show up to go for the extras casting call in Connecticut and drive an hour to go to Connecticut, and if I didn't do that a month before the shoot, and then when they called me to see if I was available, if I wasn't available or didn't make myself available to do that day, I wouldn't have this nice scene with Streep and Elizabeth Shue. So um, there you go.
Well,
Sometimes you just have to see what happens.
I mean that's the thing. I answered an ad in a newspaper for a Marilyn Monroe type character to do a cooking show, and I ended up working on a television production for 3 years in various roles, including I got the part as the Marilyn Monroe host, which ended up changing after we had a death of one of the producers, and then I ended up becoming a British opera singer who got a pie in her face, and then I got to be line producer. So I mean, there the thing is, and that's there's a guy, Reese Ulrich, or Ulick, who was on the podcast, and he had the shot at a TV show called Make Me a Supermodel in Australia, and there was 40,000 people to go to this audition, and his mom and his fiance or girlfriend at the time is like, "You need to go do this," and he's like, No, I don't want to do this. So they were all gone, and he's like, "Well, I'll go try." So he does. He goes up there and he's looking at his watch because he's got a surfing trip planned. He loves surfing. And so he goes and he's looking at his watch. He's like, "Oh, I got to go." And he gets to walk. He's getting ready to walk out of the line. And when the producer stopped him and said, No, stay. So he goes in and he goes to do his walk and he trips over his thong, flip flops. They call them thongs over there.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Well, thanks for coming." So he's doing his exit interview and he was just like, he's doing his exit interview. He's ready to go. And same producer kind of pulls him back in and says, "Come back on in." He ended up winning. He ended up winning out of 40,000 people.
Wow.
And so the reason why I'm saying this is because you never know. You may think you did awful. You may think that this isn't going to work out. But if you don't take that risk, you're not going to have those memories. So you have to be willing to sometimes put yourself out there, even if it's the most uncomfortable thing in the world. I mean, to do that audition, I had to fake I had to fake an orgasm. I had to eat a banana erotically. It was not the easiest audition. And then I had to play a bubbly blonde cooking show host who's talking about catching her husband cheating with a guy. I had
Right.
to improv the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the whole fact is, I had to put myself out there. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't have those memories.
Yeah, yeah. The risk reward thing, and oftentimes, we're so caught up on, and I mean, I hate to refrain to the pandemic again, but we get caught up on the risks of taking action versus, and we forget about the potential reward. Sometimes those rewards are hidden. We don't see the rewards, um, but if we don't take the risk, we'll never find out.
No.
And I'll be honest, it comes to mind just because we're talking a little bit about acting and extra work and so forth. I remember maybe 7 or 8 years ago, there was a casting call for extra work on this Johnny Depp film called Black Mask in Boston, and I was, an hour and a half, 2 hours drive away. I could have easily gone, but there was some type of very nuanced stuff here, folks. But it was, if you were union, they weren't giving you the special line this time. Like everybody, union and non-union, were going to go through the same line. And for whatever reason, I let the Facebook buzz get to me where all these union actors were upset about this. And I said, well, you know what? In my own mind, I'm thinking this sounds like it's not going to be a fun time. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of like tension at this casting call for extras. And if they really want me for a speaking role, they'll call me. They know me. And so I didn't go up for the casting call, and I never got called in to read for a small part in this thing, and I wasn't a part of the movie. Well, that was about 7 or 8 years ago, and I'm still talking about it. Like there was obviously something.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think there was something that was supposed to happen if I had just gotten over that hump of allowing the social media buzz of negativity, and not to say that it was a little founded, but if I could just have gotten over that and said, well, whatever it is, if it's an hour wait as opposed to 10 minutes or 2 hours as opposed to 10 minutes, let me just take the day, drive up to Boston, get in line like everybody else, and just see what happens. For some reason, Donna, I just wasn't up for it, or I allowed myself to not be up for it, I should say. And who knows? Maybe I would have had a big time spot in that movie had I shown up. But that's a situation where I did not show up. And 7 or 8 years later, I'm still thinking about it.
Well, exactly. I mean, okay, so I read cards, I read tarot, but before I moved up, all right, I had moved back down to New Orleans, and I used to go to this reader in the French Quarter. And there's a reason why I'm saying this. There was this one card she read from a circle deck, and she kept telling me, she's like, "There's something you're not doing right." She's like, "This card shouldn't be this way. You're not doing something right." And I'm just like, "Hey, okay, whatever." So I had somebody else. I had called in a radio show, and this woman's telling me I'm moving back to Chicago, and I'm like, "There's no effing way. There's no way I'm coming back to Chicago." All right, fast forward, I come up here for a trip to go see a concert, hung out with my friends, and I'm like, I'm moving back to Chicago. I go back to said reader in the quarter, and she looks at me and she goes, "Yeah, the card had fixed itself." She's like, "You're doing the right thing." So I was back on the right track.
Right.
But that being said, I mean, there's certain things that we navigate, we make a wrong decision, and sometimes we still end up back. Because I mean, I left here 9 months for 9 months to go there because I thought that was the answer, but
Right.
I ended up back here. So maybe there was something there for you, and maybe not. Maybe this is a different path for you to go, and maybe it's the longer route, the
Sure.
road less traveled.
Yeah. And we never know. I mean, I'll be honest, there's one little obscure thing in my mind. I was driving around Rhode Island probably 10 years ago, Donna, 10 or 12. Something in my system was saying, go to Newport today. Newport was a part of Rhode Island where you had to go over a bridge. Well, I had no justification to go to Newport. I had nowhere to go, particular Newport, so I didn't go. But there was something in my system telling me to go, take that trip, and I didn't. And once again, here we are 12 years later, and I still have that weird memory. So that's just the thing about following your instincts. And that was part of your shows too, the Better Two podcasts on some of your stories about following your own instincts, meaning Donna and some of the situations you were going through. Hey, folks, this is Mike. I think we may have lost Donna here on the feed. So I want to thank Donna so much for being on the show. We probably just had a little bit of an interruption in our feed. We talked for over an hour today, and I want to thank her so much for being on the show. It was a great episode. The Better To podcast is available on all the podcasts. Just put it in. It's quote better to dot 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 quote, and then and Donna's trying to get back, but somehow the show has ended. Um, and here we go. Donna's coming
There.
back, folks. Hey, Donna, thanks for coming back. I was just kind of I was wrapping up because I thought maybe we had a connection issue or something, but here you are again. I was just kind of putting over the gut instincts. What I was making a point about my little Rhode Island story was that on several of your episodes, you talk about gut instincts and following your gut instincts. And even in one of the more serious stories on your show, probably the most serious on episode one, you were really trying to follow your gut instincts, and other people, especially adults, were trying to which I really took I got angry about it. People were trying to talk you out of your emotions and your instincts, and what I was just trying to say to the audience was, don't let that happen. Always trust your instincts, because a lot of times people want to water down what we're feeling. They want to deny what we're going through. They want to deny people's instincts, especially kids. And I was just making a point that they shouldn't do that.
Well, what I was going to say real quick about that is intuition. As kids, we have very strong intuition. It's the fact that as we grow older, we are taught, no, you're hearing voices. That's not right. No, you're doing this. That's not right. But yet, I go back to when they announced that there was going to be a giveaway for Live Aid, the concert. My friend and I both looked at each other and said, "We're going." This was like a week before the contest even started, or 2 weeks before. And when the contest started, we still knew. And sure enough, we ended up winning. So, and it can be something as simple as that. I've had dreams that have come true. So you have to trust your instincts. If something in your gut tells you it's off and it just feels mucky, don't get caught up. If you feel butterflies and everything, that's great and all, but take a step back and try to refocus and ground yourself, because you don't want to just buy into the lip service that somebody's telling you. You need to trust yourself and really feel what you're feeling and own it.
And for some of the younger folks that are watching this show, I believe the summer of 1986, was it
85.
85
July
was,
3rd, July 13th, 1985.
and it's just interesting because you'll never forget that day, because who'd you see? Madonna, was
Hmm.
it Dire Straits? Was the Boss Springsteen there, or did Springsteen
Springsteen was not there, but Led Zeppelin had reunited for the first time, and the crowd was so crazed during Led Zeppelin because I was in the crowd, even though we had our seats. I wasn't even standing on my feet because the crush was that serious, and there was no water to be had except for they would pass gallon jugs out. There was no ice, and I remember being so desperate after being crushed to just have water that I was holding a gallon jug up just to get some water, because you dare not put your lips on that bottle because it's been passed back from the stage all the way to where you're at.
right? And then
So it was kind of insane.
in 2021, they'd be selling 1 liter bottles of water for $12 each, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the t-shirts, I mean, I think I bought a t-shirt, a program, and a sweatshirt, and it was 100 and something dollars. And back then that was high. The
if you
ticket it's
yeah.
the ticket itself was $50.
If you still, I don't know if you have any of those mementos left, but
I do.
that's, yeah, big time things there, big time mementos. Who was your favorite act at Live Aid? Now I got to ask, who was your favorite act on Live? I mean, was it Zeppelin or somebody else that their portion of Live Aid was like your awesomest moment for this show?
The whole reason I wanted to go was, and people can laugh, I wanted to see Power Station in Duran Duran. I was supposed to go see Power Station in New Orleans a couple of weeks later, or not a couple of weeks, a couple of days later, so 3 days later. And I wanted to see Power Station in Duran Duran. And so my friend and I stayed up 3 nights in a row, counting how many times they played Susudio on the radio from 3 p.m. Friday to Sunday night at midnight. And then you had to be the first or ninth caller. And the funny thing, this goes back to the butterfly effect. So we get to the airport, and there's this girl with blonde bangs and long hair. And I'm like, she's got to be a Duran fan. And sure enough, she was. And as this progresses, her and I end up becoming friends outside of this. I mean, we became friends. The four of us were all bonded because of this trip. But she's still one of my lifelong friends, and she became my roommate
Wow.
later on that year when my mom tossed me out of the house, which is a whole nother story, which I think I did talk about that in there. But so butterfly effect, because I won Live Aid, because I like Duran, this move to here to move to, I mean, I can sit here and if you really look at your life, you can start picking out things and seeing how they played out. I had a crappy stepdad, so I learned how to be a better stepmom. I mean, you have to look at life that way. Like I said, bad choices, you still learn something from it, and you're able to incorporate that in your life and make something better of it.
I think the positive thing about you and others like yourself that we could all learn from is if something bad happens to you, take that step back. Like you can feel the pain, obviously feel the pain, feel the emotion, feel the trauma. You're going to feel it regardless. Some people are better about taking a little bit of step back, analyzing that situation, realizing that this is not their own fault or something bad that they did. Analyze it. What can I learn, even if it's a negative lesson? What did this authority figure do incorrectly that affected me in a negative way? But what can I learn so that I don't make the same mistake, that I can do better? And there's an old saying, Donna, you've probably heard it, something like it's a wise man who learns from his own mistakes. It's a genius who learns from the mistakes of others, something like that. And sometimes as kids, we're not put in a position to say that mom or dad or stepmom or stepdad or uncle or auntie made a mistake. We're not empowered as children to articulate that, which is unfortunate. But as you get to be older and you start having kids yourself or stepkids or whatever the case may be, you can say, you know what, I'm not going to do what my uncle, my aunt, my mother, my father, my stepfather, my stepmother did, my sibling, friends, whatever. You can say, I've got to turn this negativity that I received and somehow learn from it and change that for the next person who I'm in a relationship with, regardless of what the relationship is.
Very true, but there's also something to be said. I think I was 20, and my stepfather and I had gotten into an argument, and I had said something about his kids, and he came at me and pushed me up against a wall in the hall and had his hands around my throat. Now,
Wow.
there's a reason why I'm saying this. There's a reason, because it's about perception. So his hands are around my throat, and I'm clawing at him, and I scratch his face. He rips my necklace, and then he ends up kneeing me in the groin, and that's how this finally ends. And my mom says to me, "Well, if you call the cops and he throws you out, I can't say anything." Okay, I'm her daughter, but that's not where the perception is. So for a long time, and until I think I hit my 40s, I would say that I was in a physical altercation. Okay. And then one day I was watching something and it really clicked. All the pieces clicked. And I was like, no, that wasn't a physical altercation. He was trying to kill you. His hands were around your throat. That wasn't a physical altercation. Sure, there was a physical altercation involved, but the man was trying to kill you. There
Right.
is a difference there. And I think as younger people, we don't fully want to perceive that somebody that is an adult was trying to kill us or harm us in that sense. When my mom beat me for failing the test, she actually called a friend to come get me so she wouldn't kill me.
Right.
But your mind doesn't play those games. Your mind doesn't allow you to think of those things because these are the people that are supposed to care about you. And that's why there's a very slippery slope when you have a person that is mentally ill that you're living with, or an alcoholic, is you become a people pleaser. You want everything to keep the peace in the house as much as you can. So you start apologizing over and over and over again to anybody and everybody because you start questioning whether your existence is even worthy.
Yeah, I think in the first half of what you were saying, what was coming to my mind was we seem as a society to always want to soften the edges of situations. We always want to take the extremes off. If like a traumatic situation like you experienced of this guy trying to kill you, this stepfather, but then we want to present the story, not you in particular, but anybody. We want to present it like, oh, we had a physical altercation. It's a softening of the edges because what really happened is so jagged, it's hard to even deal with it. It's hard to handle it. If it's a jagged thing, it's hard to handle. So we have to soften it in order to make it more palatable to tell people about it.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, there was, you know, okay, so I'm 16 and my mom is telling me that, my stepfather likes to give pedicures. Okay.
Okay.
I know this is, you're going, where is this going? And it took me until like, I think last year to come to the conclusion of the whole big picture here because I didn't put everything together. And she's like, if you let him give you a pedicure, he'll buy you a new pair of shoes. I'm like, okay. Didn't think about it. My mom died in 1991, and I'm going through her stuff, and I find these videotapes of film footage of her in different pairs of shoes. Nothing else, just her feet, just shoes. Still don't put it all together. And then I was watching something and I'm like, wait a second, he had a freaking foot fetish.
Yeah.
You were letting him touch your 16-year-old daughter knowing he had a foot fetish.
Right.
How screwed up is that?
Right.
But your mind as a 16, even after my mom died, I didn't put all the pieces together. It took me to be an adult hearing, I guess, about all the Me Too stuff to really sit there and go, wait a second. That's creepy, disgusting, and if I were married to him, that's fine. Whatever your kink is, that's your kink. But to put your daughter knowing he had that is just twisted.
Yeah, it's twisted, and it's like misery loves company. She probably was going along with that stuff without fully being into it, and so, like I said, misery loves company. Drag, and unbelievably and unfortunately, it's you as the daughter gets dragged into this because mom. Misery loves company. If I'm going to suffer through this indignity or this weirdness, I can make it seem less weird if someone else is along for the ride.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, she wasn't strong enough to kind of take a step back and say, I don't really like this foot fetish stuff and these videotapes and all this, and I need to get away from this guy or stop his behavior or my involvement in it. Instead of, she wasn't, for whatever reason, strong enough or equipped enough to do that. So instead, she tries to drag somebody else into it to justify her own behavior, which unfortunately was you.
She had to believe that he was saintly, because I mean, even when I saved her, and yes, I talk about it in the podcast, but even when I saved her, she told everybody else. She told me, she's like, if you save me, I'm never going to forgive you. I'm like, okay, fine. But when she came through, she tells everybody how he saved her, which couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth, because he was in their bedroom. He didn't make any phone calls. And so I had to look at the indignity of, you have to make him a saint for your own sanity. That's where it really lies. It's her own sanity that she had to create this vision of who he was.
She had to justify him. She
Mm-hmm.
had to justify her relationship with him by misappropriating the saving of her life from you who deserved it to he that didn't, in order to justify her being with him at all.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I got from it.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, sometimes when you spend time with people that are so, and look, see, we don't know, maybe you know than I don't, but maybe your mom had a really warped childhood that stemmed from her family. That's quite possible. So we just don't know, or at least I don't. Maybe you do. If she
Well,
was the victim of abuse as a child herself, we don't. I don't know.
that's the thing. I talked to somebody recently about that on a podcast, I'm pretty sure. The fact that we as adults and as kids and as young adults, we don't look at our parents as anything but our parents, and we don't give them pass with their behavior. We just look at them as, they're our parents. They should be better. They should do this. Da da da. The fact of the matter is, you have ancestral or hereditary situations that get passed on generation to generation to generation. I don't know what her background is, but she had an alcoholic father. I know that much. I don't know what my dad's background is. His mother used to brag when she was alive. She bragged to my husband at 91 years old or 90 years old how she could drink men under the table because she would drink castor oil before
Right.
she would go out. So there was that history. And if I step back and look at my family, and this is where I think the key to forgiveness comes. Even though I had all these crappy people in my life, the fact of the matter is, number one, they made me who I am. Number two, I can forgive them because that's who they were. That's all they knew. They didn't get the help. They weren't willing to get them. They weren't willing to go to therapy. That's one thing about now. We are willing to go to therapy. People are willing to talk about it. We're doing it right now. We're putting this message out there for somebody else to hear. Where before it was like, oh no, shh, you
Right.
can't say that. You can't talk about that. That's,
Yeah. Shame. 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 And
Mhm.
there's a pivotal moment in your story that, if you don't mind, just to
Go ahead.
illustrate it, is when you had called the hospital to get your mom help because she was acting suicidal, not just acting but like taking action, trying to get this clear here. And the ambulance comes to take your mom to get help, and the neighbor, one of your neighbors, asks you what's going on, and you told a lie, which was really a defense mechanism, is the way I read it. Which you said, "Oh, my mom had an allergic reaction to some food, and
Hmm.
so I called." And so what to me is just, it's so telling because it's such a microcosm of and the thing is, you kind of said, well, this was the 80s. I'm telling you, Don, I don't know if anything's changed to be true. Maybe some things have changed, but I can see that same story happening today for some folks. So I don't want to just say, well, that was back then, and now it's so much better, because I can see that story happening today. To be honest with you, I could see a kid, a girl, or a boy saying that, call it a white lie or whatever you want to call it, to kind of cover up for the situation, because the stigma of mental health, or I don't want the neighbors talking about mom's business, and we're always told this by, myob, mind your own business. And because here's the thing, as the kid, what would go through my mind is, if I told the neighbor that mom tried to kill herself and that's why I had to call the ambulance to get her help, that when mom got home from the hospital, if the neighbor came over with a plate of brownies and said, "Oh, I heard you weren't feeling too well, and I thought I'd bring over some brownies," and then mom says, "Well, who told you I wasn't feeling well?" "Well, your daughter said that you were." And so then you're getting it both ways. Not only are you put in the situation of trying to save mom's life, but when she gets out of the hospital eventually, and the neighbors ask a question because they're trying to be either nosy or helpful or both, which could be possible. People can be two things at once, nosy and helpful. Then your mom, I would fear her getting mad at me for talking too much. So that's what I'm saying, that the kids are always in these horrible positions where they're trying to referee the parent with society. And that's just a terrible position for the kid to be in, which is, it's not fair to the kid, because like I keep saying the same thing, but the kid is like the liaison to parent and the world.
Well, it's not even just the world, it's the other family members. I mean, when this all happened with my mom in high school, I mean, I had to be responsible because she's in a coma for 3 days, and that's not including the rest of the treatment. So I have to come home. I have to clean up the mess that she's made on the floor, the literal mess that is around. I have to then step into the role of being parent for my stepbrother because he's living with us. I have to make sure my stepfather's clothes are clean. I am stepping into her role. And you know what the reward I got for all of this was? Eventually, her accusing me of sleeping with my stepfather, which I never did. Did not
Right.
stand the man since the day I met him. But her mind had to vilify me,
Right.
and so how do you, did I ever tell my dad that this happened? No, I couldn't tell my dad. My dad didn't find this out until my mom died in 1991. Had no knowledge. And when he tells me, I'm on the phone with him because I'm flying to New Orleans or flying to Indiana. I'm on the phone with him at a Houston airport telling him what happened. And he's like, "Oh, well, that wasn't the first time." And I'm like, "Okay." He didn't bother to tell me. But when he said that, it immediately clicked about when I was 9.
Mm, yeah.
So you learn these, especially in homes of divorce.
Right.
You're taught to learn how to muffle down everything. You can't say anything. I mean, I could have told my dad that my mom, every time my dad dropped me off, my mom's like, "Oh, your dad moved? Well, let's go find out where he lives. You remember how to get there?" What the hell?
It seems that a lot of times there's so much energy that the kid, I'm just saying the kid, but
Hmm.
you in this situation, but I'm telling you, so many kids have been through stuff like this,
Yeah.
where the kid is put in this position of being the interpreter, the translator, the investigative reporter,
Hmm.
and but what's getting ignored is what makes the kid happy.
Right.
The kid wants to be going to piano lessons or tennis practice or track and field or guitar lessons or whatever the kid wants to do, is being ignored because the kid is putting all this energy into trying to figure out how to fix mom and or dad and or step parent. And I think it's a minor tragedy. And what people don't realize is, if they had a good childhood and didn't experience these type of things, they can say, well, you had a rough childhood, but now you're fine and now you're over it and blah blah blah. But the thing is, you're not realizing that those experiences in elementary school, high school, college, those experiences that you lost out on, you'll never be able to get back. and you'll have a residual compounded anger about it, at least for some people.
For
And the things that you missed out on when you were 6 or 7 or 10 or 12 or 15, you can't really get those back. So, in a sense, as you get to be older, you're always trying to, like, man, I kind of wish I did have those experiences. What can I do to make up for it? And it's like you're always playing catch up to life, which is tough, I think, for people.
it is. And I mean, there was a time after fifth grade, my mom befriended my fifth grade teacher, and she prided herself on being a disciplinarian. And I wanted to go to this school because it looked really cool and it was across the river. And Sylvia was going to be teaching there. So my mom's like, well, you can live with Sylvia. So I live with my fifth grade teacher, which doesn't seem like big a deal, but this woman had a Doberman Pinscher. And the first time I ever stayed there, and they became friends because once again, we're going to go to a cosmic event that causes us all to happen. We had a flood down in New Orleans on May 3rd, and it was me and another kid that was stranded at the school. So the bus took us to Sylvia's house. We stayed there overnight, and then my mom befriended her because her car got flooded out. So my mom and her become friends. Lo and behold, back to the Doberman. So I'm sleeping in this bed with this woman, and I'm told, don't get out of bed because if you move, the dog's going to bite you. And my childhood then becomes she tutors kids. So I'm stuck in a room in the kitchen doing homework with these other kids, but we're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to drink anything if you eat something. You're not allowed to do this. Oh, you need to clean up. Now she did. There were some good things. I got to go to see some amazing plays like Gil Brenner and The King and I and Gene Kelly and Brigadoon. So there was some good things. I don't want to sit there and say it was just awful. And my mom's like, well, I was over there all the time. She was over there tutoring people. She wasn't there to visit me. So I'm not living with my dad. I'm not living with my mom. I'm living with a stranger.
Right.
And so you come to a point, it's like, where do I fit in? Where do I matter?
Yeah.
And that's I think that is a big lesson, not just for kids, but even adults nowadays, because with the pandemic and the world has changed and jobs have changed, and where do we fit in? That is a big picture and a big question I've heard from a lot of people lately is, where do I fit in? Where do I belong? And I'm sure you even experienced that considering you moved before the pandemic.
Yeah, there was one day that story will be told. Well, we told it to some extent on your show,
Yeah.
but there was more to it than that. But the point of me being on your show is to say I'm glad that I moved,
Hmm.
despite the fact that several people told me I shouldn't, or why would I move, or questioning where I was moving to. But I think it all worked out for the best. I've seen about 30 live pro wrestling matches. I've gone to Disney World several times. The movie theaters have been open here. The coffee house is open till 2 in the morning. So, I mean, I made the right choice for me. It may not have been the right choice for other people, but they're not me and I'm not them. Um, I'll be honest. I get sometimes the stories that you're telling I can relate to, and it makes me a little bit not angry at you, obviously, but angry at kind of the state of the world and the situations kids are put into. Is there anything that we can do, me, you, or the listeners? Is there anything, Donna, that you know of that people can do to help kids in situations like this, or anybody in a situation like that? But is there any advocacy groups that you're a part of, or you're aware of? Anything like that that you can mention, or
It's here's the thing. You can sit there and say, well, you can talk to kids, you can reach out to kids, but even nowadays that comes with a stigma. So there's not
right?
necessarily, you can't be that advocate. And social media just creates this. I'm on TikTok, very limited. Um, but TikTok is very toxic at times. And I know I could get blasted for that. And there's a lot of social media that can become very toxic. The best thing we can do is if you're a parent, try to be with your kids. I mean, I talked to some parents on my show, and their best advice for a lot of this is to be present with their kids, limit their screen time,
Hmm.
talk to them, take them outside, make them go for a walk with you. Do things that are not where they're unplugged. Try to get them to meditate. And I talked to somebody yesterday about meditation, and it's not necessarily sitting there closing your eyes. It's something that puts you in the zone, something that you can focus on and be focal with. And if you're there as a parent, and I know that's hard nowadays, especially with some parents working two jobs, try to find a place to even give your kids 10 or 5, 5, 10, 15 minutes of your time undivided, where you turn your phone off and they turn their phone off and you have a real conversation. Because the one thing that my if I could go back and look at that 17-year-old knocking on my mom's bedroom door after having the worst day being bullied at school and her saying, I don't have time for that. If she would have just took 5-10 minutes with me and held me and said it's gonna be okay, it would have made the world a difference. It would have made me feel better.
Yeah. And it's a tough thing, and it's a real tough thing. And like I said, it's a testimony to you and to your inner resolve. Some people are just made of strong stuff, and you're one of those people, Donna. Because some people, you see their stories on TV. We're talking about this whole Olympians, Olympics, and interesting story. We don't have to dissect it too much, but the whole is her name Simone
Simone
Biles?
Biles, yeah.
Right, it's a very interesting story. And then before that, the tennis player was having issues. Is it Naomi Osaka, if I'm saying that right?
Uh,
Uh, the top three women's tennis player, kind of took a little break in her career because she was having issues dealing with the media after a big long tennis game. So she kind of raised the issue of, why are we as athletes expected to go talk to the media and answer these really tough questions sometimes? And it was, interesting debate. But the point is, there's some attention now being put on mental health, and I've seen this before, where mental health kind of gets a cup of coffee of the national attention for a while, and then it kind of fades back into the background. So hopefully this time people will kind of spark these issues, which is good.
well,
um,
let's go here for a second, if you don't mind.
Go
Let's
ahead.
go to let's go to Britney for a minute. Let's go
Oh
to
yeah.
Britney Spears for a minute. I want to take you back to when she was a new mom,
Mm,
and I want you. Everybody was chastising her about not putting the baby in the car seat and everything. Let me ask you this: so you have your baby, and you just want to go somewhere, and I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm not. What I'm saying is, how can you get into a store, get out of the store with your kid, and there's a circus around you? How can you expect to be putting your baby in a car seat when there's this circus around you trying to get a piece of you? We were all sitting there looking at Brittany going, oh my gosh, how could you do that? And then when she had her meltdown, everybody's like, oh my gosh, Brittany, how can you do that? And she was up on this pedestal way high up beforehand. And then we were very happy to see her fall. Most people.
mm.
And then now everybody's like, oh, we should free Britney. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I think we should. I think she's gotten a raw deal because nobody really looks where my point is with this is we didn't look at her when she was way high up and think about the fall she would have and how much stress and scrutiny. Imagine not being able to walk out your house. Seriously. Imagine
Right.
not being able to walk out your house because somebody's going to be taking a picture of you. Imagine trying to put your baby in a car seat. And that's not, you just can't go, okay, here we are. Imagine that you can't function and all you want to do is have peace. You're going to crack. And that's the same thing. Simone Biles is up on this pedestal. She has all these people, oh, well, you're going to do this. You're going to do this. How much pressure? And if you put yourself in that position at your job and you are a supervisor or whatever, and I mean, I was a claim supervisor and a unit supervisor, and that was a ton of pressure. And there comes a point when you just go, I can't take this anymore. And you crack. And it's a matter of, for me, I didn't completely crack, but I wasn't on a world stage. These people are on a world stage. And because they're on a world stage, we put them to such high standards that they're not even humanly capable of having. We are judge, jury, and we condemn them even though we shouldn't be. Brittany is in a situation where people took control of her because she cracked. But who put her in that situation to begin with? The same people that are now in control of her.
Great point. Yeah, and part of that discussion, great analysis, Donna. To me, is there seems like there should be some stricter rules, or if there's some laws about paparazzi. It seems like for whatever reason, paparazzi, even the name sounds so glamorous, and 1940s light bulbs, clashing with the big
Hmm.
lights. But
Yeah.
it's the paparazzi to me. It's like I couldn't do that job because I would feel like a creep. Like if I'm hiding on a beach to take a picture of a actress in a swimsuit so I can put her body on the cover of the National Enquirer or whatever and say, oh my God, she gained 10 pounds or whatever. It seems a little creepy and pervy. but yet for whatever reason, this job of public stalker for the media, it's accepted and encouraged because we feel, the consumer, that we have a right to know what Britney's doing. We have a right to know who Kim Kardashian's dating at any given time. And granted, some of these folks have kind of turned around and used reality television shows to exploit themselves, but that's a different story. But just the fact, like you said, Britney's trying to put her kid into a car seat, which is kind of difficult. Those things are complicated, and she's got 30 or 40 jerks with cameras in her face. Why can't they just be happy to go see her concert or interview her for a TV show?
Bec-
Um, it is a weird deal where people leaving their homes or going to a restaurant, even the thing with Adam Sandler, like leaving a Denny's or an IHOP because he couldn't get a table, becomes like a viral thing. This gotcha thing, this person did this, and I can't believe it. I find that it's people living vicariously, living through others at times.
Well, you're talking about paparazzi. They're also known as the stalkerazzi.
Well,
And
I've never heard that before, but that's
yeah.
perfect.
And I mean, the thing is, why can't they function just like a normal person? Because somebody's going to pay somebody $5,000 or more for one picture. Depending on the celebrity, they're going to pay that much. I mean, look at Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez now. If I open Instagram, they are all over Instagram now. And why? Because they got back together, and here comes the double standard. A romance novel, we like second chance romances, but yet there's a lot of people screaming, well, he cheated on her. Well, if she's okay with it, what does it matter? If she loves him, what does it matter? If they're just having fun, what does it matter? You're not in that relationship.
Right.
So, and I hate to say it, that's what I write about. I write about the Hollywood machine. I write about the rock industry. I write about those things because, and I write about it in the 1980s and 90s when we didn't have all the technology. You still had it. It's worse now, but you still had those people saying you were at a party and you weren't.
Right.
So,
I think part of the technology thing, Donna, is that the technology moves faster than our ability to be responsible with it is. So we've got our live streams, we've got our Twitters, our TikToks. So the technology gets invented, gets distributed, and gets used before there's a discourse on how best to use it.
mm-hmm.
And you see this with kids. Going back to the kids thing, um, the kid is upset because she got 10 happy birthday likes and the other kid got 500 happy birthday likes. So now she's doing the math and she's like, well, I guess I'm 150th as popular as my friend, or the popular girls in school get 500 Facebook happy birthdays and I only got 10. Well, maybe some kid only got one and you got 10.
But
So,
here's the thing. Here's the thing kids don't realize for the most part, though. A lot of this is algorithms. So, dare I say pusher man, we'll give you 40,000 likes for this one image. We put it where it went viral. It's great. Oh, but your next image only got 2. Sorry. Right. So, and how do you mentally deal with that? Because you're like, hey, I got it made. Oh, no, I don't. I mean, it's a computer playing a game with you.
Yeah.
So, and you can get something called shadow banned on TikTok. So if people like your video, but they haven't watched it all the way through, TikTok then decides that they're going to quash your viewership to even lesser than it was.
Huh.
So you're playing with an algorithm.
Because you're getting punished that your videos aren't being watched to fruition.
Correct.
Like people are interesting. So they're holding the content provider accountable for making a Martin Scorsese or an Alfred Hitchcock film in a TikTok. See, I don't use TikTok. It's one that I've stayed away from. But I get it. It's prevalent. There was something I was going to say. I was on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and a young lady, I think from Ireland. I have a whole pro wrestling, world that I'm friends with people and pro wrestling fans and so forth. And this young Irish female pro wrestling fan posted something about her personal life. She's like, I posted something about, myself on Facebook and nobody liked my post. Now I see what my real friends are all about. And I took a step back and I said, you know what? I can easily mock this. I can easily say it doesn't matter. I can ignore it. But I said, you know what? I bet this kid, because I know she's a teenage pro wrestling fan in Ireland or something. I said, she doesn't realize what she's dealing with. She doesn't realize the algorithm thing. Like it took me a moment to kind of figure it out. Like, let me just clue her in a non-insulting way. And I, instead of mocking it, because my instinct would have been to mock it, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But I said, because this is real to her. Like this
Yeah.
is really, this is not, she's not being goofy. She's not putting a smiley face. She really feels bad that whatever it was in her life is not getting some type of attention. So for her, this is real. And it's not something that she's going to play off as a joke, because here she is on another social media app, Twitter, sharing her Facebook live. So I chimed in and I said, you have to realize that many of your friends slash family probably didn't even see your post, because depending on the time of the day of your post, it doesn't come up in everybody's feeds. And then
Yeah.
I shared the link to my, of course, always doing self promotion. Even in times of being a nice guy, I had to share the MikeMessier.com Living for Likes article. If she really, for further research, young lady in Ireland, if you
Yeah.
really want to get to the heart of it, because I couldn't put this in 240 characters or less, but here is the research I've done on Facebook, which will explain to you that you're being manipulated. So if she chose to click and read my article, which cited 4 other articles, she would get the full picture that I was just trying to make a point. Your friends are not necessarily ignoring you. They may not have even seen the post. So don't let this tool of social media make you question all your friends and family as bad people, because they may not have even seen it.
Yeah.
Now, if I was in person with her, I'd also say, and even if they did see it and ignore it, that doesn't mean they're bad people either. Maybe they just didn't know how to respond, or maybe they're going through something. So I try to be aware of that, because I do have a troll side of myself, the angry wrestling fan that comes out on social media. I try to limit that to my wrestling posts and my wrestling Facebook groups, but sometimes the angry wrestling fan, Donna, flares up and it rears its ugly head to the world in general.
Well, and I mean that, something that you said there, you have to take, and we don't always do this. We always should take a step back when somebody is acting out, whether it's yelling or screaming or upset about something, because the sheer fact is we don't know what's going on with them.
Right.
They may just be lashing out because they have nobody else to lash out to. So sometimes we have to take a step back and
I,
really look
I
at the situation.
yeah, I mean, I try to be really, I mean, I had a weird situation once again 10 or 12 years ago, Donna, early Facebook for me. Somebody on Facebook was threatening to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And a couple of us, and it was just Facebook friends. I didn't know the person. They were in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I remember looking at this stuff, and other people were commenting, are you really, like people are getting concerned. I actually called the Pittsburgh police. I ended up on the, I called the police because I'm like, am I supposed to do something? Like,
Yeah.
I felt like I should. So her thing said Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I called the police and I gave them her Facebook name and I said, look, I don't even know this person. I'm up in New England, but this person is threatening to commit suicide. This is their Facebook name. I feel like I have to do something. So this is what I'm doing. And as it turned out, I guess there was somewhat of a happy ending, because the next day the person was on their Facebook thing and saying, hey, I'm okay. And thanks for reaching out, everybody. Like and I didn't know if was it a scam? Was it a fake? I don't know. But
That's the tough thing about, because I did belong to a suicide prevention group at one point on Facebook, and we had this guy who came in and he kept saying he was going to do it. And the fact of the matter is he was just trolling for women.
oh boy,
So
what an angle.
yeah, you have to pay attention, because some people are legit, some people are legitimately crying for help and they don't know what to do. And then there's the other group of people that are just trolling
Right.
to get attention. So
Right.
you have to, it's hard to navigate it. It really is.
Yeah, and I've kind of learned for me that now I'm up to, like, Facebook is like 2,500 friends. A lot of those are legitimate real life friends, but there's a certain percentage like I don't know this person, and so you kind of, what I like to say, pick your spots. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And so there you go. But let me round this thing up. We've had a great interview,
Thank you.
and Donna, please, one more time. And when you hold up your books this time, I want to ask if you could hold them up for a little bit longer. Hold them up
Sure,
for like,
sure,
6, 7, 8 seconds. Let people get a good look at that
sure.
cover. They can find this on Amazon.
Yeah, this is on Amazon. The paperback is on sale currently too. I also have signed copies of both my books through my website. And you can find this on some other retailers. So that's My Days with the Dark Muse. That's Nigel the Bass Player's Journal. And then this is a romantic suspense. Whoops. Love is Worth Waiting For. This is currently on Kindle Unlimited, and only Kindle Unlimited, as well as paperback.
Nice cover. I dig that cover.
Thanks. I had a cover designer help me create it. So, and
And
website is D.M Needom, like that, except without the periods. DMNeedom.com.
I'm gonna just in case there's any audio only listeners, DMNEEDOM.com. For those also in the reading mode, here's my book, A Distance from Avalon, When the Dying and the Dead Reunite. That's my first book. So I'm going to follow your lead and write more.
Good.
And that it's such a fun thing to do, is to write a book. It's cool. It's great. So Dauna, aka DM, thank you so much for being here today. You have a great rest of
Thanks
your
for having
weekend.
me.
It was awesome. A pleasure. Thank you so much. And for people who are watching, I want to thank Adam, Todd Hamilton, I believe. Feel free to share the link if you've enjoyed this interview. There'll be more on Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel, and on Dauna's show, the Better To podcast. Copy the URL. I'm telling you, folks, you may not realize it, but this show will have so much more power for someone besides the two of us to share it. Because if you share it, the watcher shares the show. You're basically saying, hey, I didn't produce this show. I wasn't a guest on this show, but I think it's good quality and a good conversation. And I want to share it with other people because I think they'll enjoy it. It has a lot more weight than when one of the people on the show shares it. So just go ahead.
And if you have a Better To moment and you would like to be on the show, please reach out. There is a link on my website, dmneedom.com, or you can email me at donna@better2podcast.com. And yeah, I mean, I'm still looking for guests and I love sharing stories. I have 2 interesting stories coming up really quickly, I'll tell you about.
Go ahead.
And they're not until I think the fall, but one of them is the former prime minister's bodyguard in Australia who had a problem with drugs. And he had contemplated suicide, and now he is an advocate. He sits on a board for New Zealand and Australia for mental health. And I have another interview coming up where this gentleman sued Prince for $1 billion. But I also have a couple of next week, I think I'll be interviewing somebody that was on The Voice. He was the first runner-up for season 17. So, I mean, there's a lot of different stories. There's people that you may know. There are people that you don't know. There's regular people. So if you have a story, please reach out.
D.M Needom, a.k.a. Dauna, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the audience. This has been the first public release of A Messier World. Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel with our first guest, D.M Needom. Thank you so much, everybody, for checking it out, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.